Hi guys, this is Mike L from the Comic Book Syndicate. We're with Tim from Border City Comics. Tim has a few gripes about how Marvel and DC are treating their output. Let's talk about that, Tim.
I think what's happened, there's been a real lack of focus lately on the core titles. And I mean, if you look at the shelf on any given week, you can see like Moon Girl, Howling Commandos, Venom Space Knight, Old Man Logan, Inhumans. There's really too much focus on the offshoot stuff. And I just don't think it's good for the industry.
Okay, so now to give a counterpoint, isn't it good for DC and Marvel to diversify the number of characters they publish?
I think it is, but I still think the core titles have to be the bread and butter, and I don't think that's the case right now.
So ideally, how would it be different?
Better?
Yeah, well, let's put it this way. Has there been a time where their scheduling strategy has been different and therefore sales have been higher?
I think so. I think if you look back at the mid 80s, late 80s, maybe even really early 90s, there was a lot less titles being published by both companies. And when like an offshoot came out, it was a big deal. Now there's offshoots, new issues every single week. And I think it's really watered down both lines.
So like, let's just say going back to the 80s, Marvel would have their main superheroes that everyone probably recognizes: Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America. Then once in a while, you'd have Vision and the Scarlet Witch. You'd have Hercules in his own series. Is that the kind of situation you're talking about?
Yeah, that plus if you had Spider-Man, you might have had like Amazing Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and Spectacular Spider-Man at the most. Mm-hmm. And then maybe a one-shot or a graphic novel. But if you look, for example, at the upcoming schedule for Marvel, there's 13 related Spider-Man titles coming out in 1 month.
You're saying a parent walks in.
Yep.
Or a casual reader walks in and they're interested in experimenting with different titles. Do you think Marvel has too many non-household name titles? Is that the problem?
I think so. I think it's good to have those diverse titles. I just think they've got too many and it's confusing readers.
Okay. So ideally, they would literally reduce the number of titles they have. They have too many.
Too many titles and not enough good talent to fill those titles, which is, I think, a real key as well.
What would be an ideal number of titles for Marvel and DC to publish each?
Ideally, I think about 20 to 25 each of the core books. And then you can always have like a few offshoot books.
You know, I have a pitch for Marvel and DC, but I'm afraid to use it here because I'm afraid they'll steal it. I think DC could solve a lot of problems by splitting their company back into the individual companies that they've bought out over the years, so that they could have a Fawcett line that was strictly for kids. They could have a Charlton line that was maybe a little bit more realistic. They could have a Wildstorm line that's more like the old Image comics of the 90s. And that way, if a reader only liked an Image style, he could buy Wildstorm. Yep. And he could buy all of them, 4 or 5 titles. Yep. If they like Charlton, they could buy 3 or 4 titles. And if they like mainline DC, maybe there's only 12. That way you could afford to read all of those titles. What do you think of that?
Oh, I think it's a good idea. I think it strengthens each particular universe, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah, and the best example would be Vertigo, where Vertigo characters were DC characters, but they had nothing to do with the mainline DC universe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you could even go further and say you have like the Fawcett and the DC. You could also add, like you said, the Vertigo. You could add like a kids line specifically for kids. Yeah. And then they have stuff that's kind of off the beaten path, like the Wonder Woman stuff, like the digital first stuff. And that could be a separate line as well.
Yeah, like almost like create a line for, for example, if you're a Bronze Age fan, you buy these 5 titles that maybe they're all created by Bronze Age writers and artists. Yep. So all those fans have their Bronze Age titles. All the fans that like the Ultimate Universe type realistic stuff have their own little subline, right?
Yep. Instead of trying to manipulate people into buying your whole line when they don't want to.
And DC has proven with the New 52 that does not work. No one can afford to buy 52 comics, especially when they're $4 each, right?
Exactly.
All right, there you go, guys. We've just figured out everything, how to solve all the problems. Okay, thanks.